Good evening and welcome to Satsang with Premananda. Like always, you are very much invited to come into the meeting through Skype. So when you want to join through Skype, you need a headset with a microphone and headphones, and you turn down the volume of Make TV. Our Skype address is Premananda Satsang TV. The next possibility to meet Premananda and spend an intensive time with him is the Whitsun retreat, from Friday the 6th to Monday 9th of June. And if you want to visit us here in the Open Sky House, you are always welcome. You can come as a guest or as a volunteer. And for more information about that, you can visit our website www.openskyhouse.org. Thank you. Have a nice satsang.
Welcome to Satsang. I'll start with a few jokes. A lady was on a business trip. Since she was so tense from all the meetings, she decided she would go onto the roof of the hotel and sunbathe to help her relax. She went to the top of the hotel, stripped off, and laid nude on the face down on the roof. After about an hour of sunbathing, she heard someone come onto the roof. It was the manager of the hotel. He said, "Excuse me, miss, but do you mind sunbathing somewhere else?" "Why?" asked the lady. "I'm on top of the hotel. Nobody can see me." "True," the man replied, "but you are lying on the sunroof of the restaurant." An ant and an elephant share a night of romance. The next morning, the ant wakes up and the elephant is dead. "Shit," says the ant. "One night of passion, and I will spend the rest of my life digging a grave." An Englishman, this is a particular joke for our guest tonight. An Englishman was walking along one day when his friend rode up on an incredibly shiny new bicycle. The first guy was stunned and asked, "Where did you get such a nice bike?" The second man replied, "Well, yesterday I was walking home minding my own business when a beautiful woman rode up to me on this bike. She threw the bike to the ground, took off all her clothes and said, 'Take what you want.' The second Englishman nodded approvingly and said, 'Good choice, the clothes probably wouldn't have fit.'" Good. Well, I'd like to welcome Alan Jacobs, who's flown in today from London. And since 30 years, is it? So for many years, Alan has been leading the Ramana Maharshi.
25, roughly.
25 years. He's been leading the Ramana Maharshi Foundation in London. And they have meetings twice a month. And he's been also very kind. 2 or 3 years ago, he wrote us the foreword for our book, Arunachala Shiva, which is about the life and teachings of Ramana Maharshi. He's a man steeped in the teachings. He's been with our friend Robert Adams, also in Sedona in the United States. And more recently, he was spending time with our friend Radha. So we have a lot of things in common, and in particular, every year, in January, when we go to India, he's also there in Tiruvannamalai, staying in the Ramana Ashram. So welcome.
Thank you very much. I think we've seen each other on and off over the years, haven't we?
Yes.
In different times and places.
We're getting gracefully old together. So we thought we might dialogue about something tonight. Mm-hmm. And the topic that came up was this question that if the self is perfect, why do we have to do anything? Why is it necessary to do some spiritual practice?
Yes, well, this is the hallmark of the Neo-Advaita movement, which has come into being in the last, fairly recently, in the last 10 years. And the word Neo-Advaita is well chosen because Neo means new formed. So it's a new form of Advaita, in the same way as, let's say, Neoplatonism is a new form of the Platonic doctrine. Mm-hmm. And this Neo-Advaita has a principle that most of the teachers, and there are many of them, mainly in America, but several in Europe as well, that they often commence when people say, well, should I do any spiritual practice? They say, why should you want to do spiritual practice? You're absolutely perfect as you are now. Now this, of course, is very therapeutic for the individual, but it's based on a conceptual idea of awakening, purely conceptual. It is true that the self is absolutely perfect, no question about it. But unfortunately, the self is veiled by the egotism of call it the ego mind, or the I am the body idea. That causes a veil or a curtain. And unless that curtain is removed, we don't feel the glory of the real self. I mean, at this moment, the self is here now in every one of us. And it's illuminating what appears on the screen of consciousness, but we're not getting the full power of it. And the power of the jnani is on a totally different level of vision. Ours is a kind of attenuated, step-down vision. I think, yes, it's called Chidabhasa, reflected consciousness. Ramana draws a diagram in his collected works showing that the vasanas, which you could term the subconscious mind, the repressed subconscious, the hidden tendencies, these form a mirror. So the light of the consciousness which is there, by which we see, is reflected by the mirror, and so the consciousness is weakened. So this is all missed in the teaching. It's not told to the devotees who come to a Neo-Advaita teacher. They skip it. Maybe because it's a bit too complex and a bit too metaphysical for the people they're speaking to, but they're quite satisfied in saying, you are perfect as you are. Why do you want to change what you are? And this is based on a concept that the self is already perfect. But it misses out the vital point that unless one removes the I am the body notion or the ego mind through some form of spiritual practice, of which Ramana Maharshi gives many alternatives, there will be no eventual realization of the self. One will just remain in a conceptual state. So it's a fallacy, and we were talking about it earlier. And we did agree that there is a virtue in Neo-Advaita, that it is an introduction to many young people to first come across the basic concepts, and the mature ones do move on to a teacher who's giving the real truth. Ambassadors of Ramana Maharshi, like our good selves, and others. Sorry to be so long-winded, but
no.
Here we go.
I mean, of course, one of the reasons why people are not encouraged to do practice is because somehow in the society we've become a bit lazy, I think. Somehow we want everything now, and we don't really want to be told that we have to do 5 years of spiritual practice 10 years of spiritual practice. In my case, it was 15 years of spiritual practice. I think I was a bit slow, probably. But anyway, it's not something that can happen in 2 hours. Of course, within 2 hours, if the meeting is an energetic meeting and if the teacher is a clear teacher, I think it's possible in 2 hours to feel at the end of the 2 hours that the veil has somehow moved away or become thinner, and you can feel very, very good. You leave the meeting feeling very, very good because you are more connected to the self, the shining of the self, let's say. But then, of course, you go back to your family, or you go back the next day to your workplace, you meet some friends, you come into some kind of situation, and the vasanas again get stirred up, and again this good feeling starts to fade away. And this is often the experience that people have with spiritual meetings. And out of that experience, people say, oh, satsang, it doesn't work. And of course, that's slightly ridiculous because, of course, it's not about working or not working. It's about whether you're working or not working. Yeah? So if you're not ready to do some work, then you'll get these kind of highs and then lows again, highs and then lows. It's an inevitable part of the spiritual journey. I mean, we see it in our community, that we have quite a lot of jobs to do in the daily life in order to run such a big community. And we discover that we easily can get caught up, even though it's a spiritual community, even though we're encouraged to be self-aware, even though we're encouraged to do self-inquiry. It's very easy to forget everything and just get caught up with the work situation, the phone call, the bad news, the extra pressure in the day or something like this. And of course this is what people are experiencing in the general society, I would think.
Yes, no, I'd agree with that completely. I think another question is that most of these new Advaita teachers, they travel from place to place. And they can't supervise any spiritual practice, whereas a resident teacher is able to interact with the devotees or and so he can guide and advise.
Right.
But here there isn't that kind of contact. And you have to wait for the next month or week or whenever they happen. And you get the same message. Then, of course, they do offend a lot of traditional people because they charge quite extensively, or some of them very extensively, for this procedure. Whereas in India, the general tradition is you give donations rather than make an actual charge. It's not obligatory.
Right.
So there's a difference there. But there is a certain benefit, as we've seen.
Well, of course, sitting with a group of people, and there's almost bound to be some kind of benefit, because sitting there together, then somehow the daily tasks fall away and the mind becomes quieter. And if the teacher is energetic, then you find yourself getting touch from this energy during a 2-hour meeting.
I'll tell you my own view, which I haven't expressed much to other people, but I tried to form a view on this. We're, all of us, the second generation of Ramana devotees. Now, the first generation had a very big advantage. They were able to be in his presence. They could ask a direct question. They could get the guidance then. And they could stay in the ashram for as long as they needed. And the numbers of people, according to Ganeshan, who achieved self-realization through being in his presence, that generation, he numbered them as 40.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
And quite a few are published, their memoirs and reminiscences. In fact, it's on the web now. He's given a lot of reminiscences recently.
All right.
So, the second generation then has a problem, because the great supreme guru, one of the greatest gurus perhaps in the last 1,000 years, we don't have the direct contact with him when he's in the body. Now, he did say on his deathbed, "I shall never leave you." And he didn't want to be regarded as the body. His real nature was that he was pure consciousness awareness, which is in us. And I don't know if people here have read Padmalaya, this book.
They haven't read it,
no.
But they
well,
heard
in
about
there
it.
he gives a list of his promises and declarations to his devotees. And one of them he says, "How can you ever despair when I am inside you?" Now we come to the point. Ramana Maharshi we could equate with the self inside us. So it's not as if he's not there, but we have to turn inward to make a connection with him. And we could say the Satguru is inside the heart, or the self is the teacher, or God is in the heart. You have a choice of language to suit your own preference. So this second generation is forced to go turn inward. And I think some people have even said we're in a better position because the others were just relying on, if you like, feeding from him. Whereas we've got no alternative but to look inside and find the self ourselves. And there is a shortage. This is another thing. Why aren't there seems to be less self-realized beings who people can consult at the moment on the planet. There may be a few one can name. So people have to go this way. And he was very clear in the essay he wrote called Spiritual Instruction in his collected works. He said very clearly, people said to him, where is the location of the self? Where is the heart, which is a synonym of self? And he said, for those who are still identified with the mind and body, they can find it on the right side of the chest. Now this was from his own experience. When he was 17, and he dived into himself, posing the question, who dies? He found that the experience came from the right side of the chest. Now he says this is only a temporary position. After self-realization there is no center. The self is everywhere, it's all embracing, it's Brahman, it's the substratum of everything. It doesn't have a location, it's everywhere. But for us, in our position, we can turn inwards on that spot, using our attention inwards. Another teacher of mine, Douglas Harding, he used to say you turn round at 180 degrees. And focusing the pure attention in that direction, after a while you get a palpitation. Now Ramana said, if that palpitation happens, it's an indication you're moving in the right direction. And it does occur if one, as one form of practice. I'm not saying it's the only form of practice, because I think later, when I give another talk, I'm going to give alternatives. It's just one. So somebody said to him, well, it's all very well, but at the moment I'm only getting this palpitation. I'm not getting anything else. I can't get into the real self. And he said, well, it's like when you're drilling for water in India, the water table is under the rock. And this is the case especially in southern India. So you have these big drilling machines that go up and down, up and down, up and down, until they get to the point where they hit the water and whoosh, up it comes. And you have a well. So he says it's the same here. You found where the moisture is, now you go on drilling. And one can explain this a bit more detail if one wants to. It's just one of the methods. There's no must or should or ought. There are plenty of alternatives, and this is just one.
I mean, I think Ramana Maharshi himself, when people would visit him, he wouldn't be a kind of authority only on self-inquiry. He was usually quite relaxed, and he would invite people, ask them what is their practice, whatever it is, and then he would tend to encourage them to continue the practice, knowing that in the future, anyway, they would come to this question of who am I? That who am I is a kind of natural question that comes out of any practice. And of course, this question is also at the root of any spiritual search. In the end, you come to this question. Wherever you start, you're going to at some point reach this question. So I think it's true in Delphi, above the gate of the temple there, they have know thyself. And so he was quite relaxed about this question. He wasn't an authority pushing particularly self-inquiry.
No, I agree totally on that. He took very strong exception to gurus who told people exactly what they should do. He would only make suggestions in answers to questions, because he said if he told people they must do it, it was forming some kind of shadow between them and the real self, because the real self, in a way, is the teacher. So he would make suggestions based on his experience, which they could follow if they wish. And there was no must or ought. There were suggestions, and if people didn't understand that particular approach, then there would be another suggestion made. So, as you say, it's a very relaxed approach. It's not a must or ought.
And we can also say that if it doesn't happen in this lifetime, don't worry, because it's been very well arranged that you'll come back next lifetime. And it could be actually several thousands of lifetimes.
Well, we may be back now.
So we don't have to worry about the pace in a way. You see?
That's true. I mean, no, it's completely...
So we can really relax and enjoy the journey, because there's not really a time scale, you see. You don't mind having your nappies changed every few hundred years again.
It's the going to school bit which I object to.
Oh, right, yes.
There we go. But they do say you get a more auspicious life, based on the work that you've done in this life.
Right.
The next, if you don't achieve self-realization, the next one will be
a more
easier,
comfortable
more
life.
auspicious.
Right. Yeah, you get better parents next time, guys. And you get served better food, and you'll live in a bigger house. I came across Robert Adams when I was, I think 20 years ago, when I was living with Papaji. we got a kind of bootlegged copy of Silence of the Heart, and it was photocopied and passed around the whole Sangha, and I was completely touched by what he was telling in his satsangs. And I understand that you were in Sedona in his last months.
7 weeks.
7 weeks, yeah. And everybody here is actually familiar with Robert. I often read a quotation from that book, Silence of the Heart, and then discuss it. Perhaps you'd like to share a little bit what you experienced with him.
Yeah. Well, something comes to mind about what we were talking about even before that, this question of Neo-Advaita. Another aspect of it is, in India, the children are all brought up on the Hindu Dharma, so they know the Gita from childhood. They'll probably learn the Upanishads later. And so when they come in contact with a great sage, they're already partially prepared. In the West, people may have a religious upbringing, but it will either be, wouldn't be Hindu, most unlikely. So this Neo-Advaita, in a way, is familiarizing people with the concepts which they've never learnt from childhood. So it has a certain value as an introduction in that way. Now, coming to Robert. I'll just link that with another point. So you could say Neo-Advaita is a way of softening up the West.
Right. Or maybe it's just a typical misunderstanding that happens when Western teachers don't spend enough time familiarizing themselves with the teachings.
Yes.
I mean, to be honest with you, here in Germany, I don't think we're so blighted with Neo-Advaita as you are in England.
Oh. Well, we get quite a number in England, or we have had, but they're dropping off a bit now. America is more luxurious.
And of course, in America, everything is much faster. Yeah? They're impatient. They don't want to know that they need to do spiritual practice for a few years. They want to have it now.
The BBC put on a satire about this. I don't know how they got hold of it. Well, it was to do with DST. And they called it Instant Enlightenment plus the Value-Added Tax.
Right.
Anyway, let's go on to Robert.
But Robert was a very sincere teacher,
yes.
I think.
Well, you see, Robert follows that. You could say Robert is the guru for the West, in a certain way, because he's speaking the language of ordinary people in the Western world. That's his language. Whereas most of the translations and essays on Indian sages, they're written, the translations are not very good, and the people may not have a full command of English. And it is sometimes people find it tiring to read these things, whereas with Robert, they can read Silence of the Heart and it appeals almost immediately. So you could say he's the guru of the West, and he had a remarkable life. At the age of 7, I don't know if people know this.
Well, I think you go on. They've heard it.
Vision of a young, well, not a young, an Indian sage in the foot
his
of
diapers, I think. Yeah.
Well, in his
a little man with
yes,
diapers.
Yes, the loincloth. Yes.
The loincloth. Yeah.
And he didn't understand this at all. But he found he had this kind of ultra-religious feeling from then on, and he met Joel Goldsmith, who was a Christian non-dual teacher, and he became friendly with him, and eventually he went to see Paramahamsa Yogananda, who was a great, you could say a great jnani, in America, and he said, I want to join your order and become a monk in your order. And Paramahamsa Yogananda said, no, I'm not your guru. Ramana Maharshi is your guru. And Robert told him about the vision he had. He said, yes, that was Ramana. Now Ramana had this siddhi, if you like, of appearing to people in dreams, or even occasionally, I think it happened to Papaji, where he appeared
in his body.
In his body,
yes.
Knocking
on the door of his house.
And Ganapati Muni, he did the same.
Mm.
This was a siddhi, a sort of a great power which the jnanis has. Now they're not sought after. They're incremental or incidental to the self-realization. And Bhagavan said you shouldn't seek for powers. That's a mistake, but they may happen as a consequence. And there were cures which happened around him. And he said he never did anything. The cures happened purely through his presence. There was no deliberate intention. That's an interesting point. Well, anyway, Robert, as soon as he heard he was Ramana Maharshi was his guru, he rushed off to Tiruvannamalai, and it was almost as if Ramana was expecting him on arrival, and the first thing Ramana said was, "Have you had anything to eat?" Which is a good Indian, I think, hospitality, isn't it?
Right.
To a guest, yes.
Right.
But anyway, he was there for 3 years, and he assisted in the work of the ashram. He bought a jeep and was able to do errands and things which they weren't able to do. And he was there for 3 years. When Ramana left the body, he then visited the other main teachers in India at that time, who were Nisargadatta Maharaj and Anandamayi Ma. Then he came back to America, but he didn't have any great yearning to teach. He earned a conventional living. It's a bit of a mystery, but he was connected with some kind of institution which was helping people. I suppose you could call it therapy.
Oh, yeah.
Conventional
I thought he
therapy.
worked as a janitor.
Well, he did later. He worked as a janitor in a big apartment building. That's equivalent to working in you get a flat, you get an apartment in the building in return for looking after it, but looking after it doesn't involve very much. It's more of a security role. So it was quite comfortable. Well, one day he saw an advertisement in the Los Angeles paper. That's where he was living with his wife at that time. He got married quite young, probably about 21. His widow's still alive, Caribbean. And people said to him, "Robert, why did you get married?" And he said, "Well, it just happened." End of story. But she's a very devoted woman and a very hospitable, warm, loving woman, and she, attended everything he said, and she's looking after what goes on now, controversially in some respects, but nevertheless. And she must be getting on well into her 80s now, I think. And they do hold satsang in Sedona still, but it's only recordings of his talks. There's no teacher there. So, after this 3 years, he didn't start teaching, but he saw an advertisement in a Los Angeles paper by a man who said he wanted to start a group in Los Angeles on the teachings of Ramana Maharshi. If anyone was interested, they should contact him. So Robert, went along and said, "Yes, I'm interested." Actually, he had a dream, which, in the dream, he was more or less given the intimation he should teach. And as soon as they met him and he started talking, they realized they'd got a jnani in their midst. And it grew and grew in Los Angeles, his group. And Ganeshan, who's one of the family, the grand-nephew of Ramana Maharshi, was in America on one occasion. and he was wearing his full Indian regalia in the airport waiting for a flight, and a lady came up to him and said, "Are you Indian?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Well, you must meet my master, Robert Adams." Well, this rang a tremendous bell in Ganeshan because he knew Robert as a child. He was about 5 when Robert was there.
Right.
Or maybe a bit older, 5 to 8. So he immediately went, and then he started to, tell people about him, and various people did visit, and he himself used to visit every year and sit at his feet. Now, Robert eventually the group in Los Angeles grew and grew and grew, and he eventually got Parkinson's disease in his late 60s. And the doctor said, "You must go to a better climate. Los Angeles is full of smog and traffic and all the rest of it." And they recommended he go to a nice, dry, sunny climate. And Sedona, which is in the Red Rock district of the Arizona desert, is certainly dry and hot. And it's a kind of New Age center in America. It's I don't know what the equivalent in Germany is. Have you got a New Age center here?
I think it's Open Sky House.
Sedona
It's a
is
sort of wet version.
Yes. Sedona is the American version of Sky House, no question. And most of the people, they left their jobs and moved there. Now, Sedona was a New Age center, and the wealthy hippies used to build lovely mansions in Sedona because of the red rocks. They say it had some special power. But they never lived there much. They were always, traveling all over the place. And they needed house sitters. So most of Robert's devotees got jobs as house sitters in these mansions. And living in great luxury. And the satsangs were held in some of these houses. Well, he had a tremendous sense of humor. And he was two different people in a sense. Off duty, he was very relaxed, full of fun and games and jokes. He looked a bit of a slouch. I mean, he used to wear a baseball cap like there and a T-shirt often with... He had one embroidered with "Kill the Ego." And, it was just full of fun and almost practical jokes, really. But what he did, he said he would meet anybody who wanted to meet him for lunch, or he would give a meal for the whole satsang once a week. You had to pay for your own meal, but the whole satsang would go to one restaurant. They had to rotate the restaurants because after they'd been there, the restaurant didn't want them again. Because it ran into confusion. Everybody was ordering their own meal, and the waitresses were going mad, trying to, all the 50 different things, and the bills they had to keep, and the records. And these meals ended up usually as a bit of a riot. There were very talented people there who used to get up and make speeches and jokes, and there was even a professional actor who could do a perfect impersonation of Robert Adams as Groucho Marx. And this caused great hilarity. And one day Robert saw somebody dozing off, and he took his napkin and threw it at him to wake the man up. And then this man, when he saw what happened, he took his napkin and threw it at Robert, and it descended into a napkin fight. It was all a bit of an undergraduate kind of atmosphere. So there was a lot of fun. He would go to people's houses. They had potluck parties a lot. And he would even, if there was music, he would dance with selected ladies.
Who was selecting them, Robert?
Yes.
Ah.
Well, not totally. Some of them went up to him.
Some selected Robert.
Yes, and they said, "Will you dance?" And he did. It was mainly Motown music, I might add. Motown. And one day he was asked to bless a house, and he agreed. Well, he stood at the door, and he was dressed up as Columbo, with rather a sort of shaggy raincoat, and the hat that Columbo, kind of slouch hat that Columbo had. And he had his hand like this in his right-hand pocket. And as people came in, he pulled out a water pistol and squirted them. So when it came to blessing the house, he pointed the water pistol at the wall, and then he said, "I bless this house." Anyway, that was the humorous side. The man was, totally lovable by everybody. And there are lots of anecdotes about it. He had a brother who was a chemist, and the brother used to ring him up and say, "You're good for nothing." And Robert said, "Yes, that's right, I'm good for nothing." Anyway, so then we come to the serious part, which were the satsangs. And there they were very carefully given talks, which are recorded in Silence of the Heart. And they are little masterpieces of teaching, really, and they've affected a lot of people. And he would take questions, and people loved him. He was loved. So he gave private interviews once a week. You could book for a private interview, and if you wanted to invite him for lunch, he would come. And then people would ask if they wanted to. They could talk about the teaching over lunch, either after lunch or over lunch. So it was very accessible. And yes, I think that's.
And from your knowing about Ramana Maharshi's teachings and knowing Robert, did you feel that Robert was actually the closest Western teacher you've heard, giving out Ramana's teachings?
No question. See, when I first went, it cost quite a bit of money to go there. My wife and I flew, and then there was accommodation, and I had to hire a car, because in America the public transport is pretty useless in the towns. Everybody drives everywhere. So the whole thing was costing me a lot of money. And when I got there, he had this Parkinson starting, and what I got listening was it sounded like bird song. I couldn't make it all out. And I was very disappointed. I thought, we've come all this way and we can't really understand him. But then suddenly, it came to me, it didn't make a bit of difference. Because the feeling of love and peace was so palpable that it didn't matter. And occasionally you call it consciousness, awareness, It didn't matter. But eventually, when it got too bad, some of his devotees learned how to lip read, and they repeated. And then eventually he wrote out the talks, and they were read.
Oh, really?
But he did answer questions with great struggle. If you wanted to speak to him, and he would listen very carefully to what you said, and he would answer exactly, but he spoke slowly. And it was a bit of a struggle. But anyway, it wasn't the Parkinson that killed him. It was eventually got liver cancer. And when they diagnosed it, he said, "What's cancer? It's just a word," he said. so. That's one of the most remarkable men, I would say, of the 20th century.
Were you there when he left his body?
Well, no, not quite. We'd just returned.
Returned to the UK?
Yes, we knew he was very ill, and then people rang us up, and we arrived about 2 days after the funeral. And he was buried in Sedona. And then we stayed on because Ganeshan rushed out to take over the Satsang. He was kind of consoling. People felt they'd lost their father in a way. And so Ganeshan stepped in and took the Satsangs. And because I was, he was my boss at that time.
Ganeshan was your boss because you were working for this.
Yes. So I stayed on with him, but I didn't.
Right.
I didn't have to do anything much. Just listen. In the presence of these people, it's best to keep quiet.
Right.
But he was paradoxical in a way. But then great teachers are. They're not. They want to shock you into some kind of understanding.
Right. And the other teacher who we have always been very close with is Radha this young, relatively young Indian woman. I think she was probably in her 40s. And about 10 or 15 years ago, you made contact with her for the first time.
Well, I was in Arunachal the normal way, and a friend of mine said, "Oh, you must come, there's a most marvellous teacher appeared on the hill. You've got to come." Well, I've heard this so many times.
Right. Well, every year there's a new teacher on the hill.
So I thought, well, I'm not going to, I've heard this, and I'm not really interested. And he said, you must come, this is different. So eventually I agreed because I'd known him for some time. And I went, and very beautiful woman in orange, and something happened. I felt a beam, it was like a beam coming from her and hitting me, and it's just, the only word I could put on it was, this is sacred, she's sacred. It was just like that. And so I did talk to her. She gave the satsang, and it was, very nice and full of humour and light. And then I spoke to her afterwards, and I told her I was only here for a short while, but I told her the experience I had. She made a very cryptic remark, which we won't go into now.
No?
She said, I'm only I'm only an appearance in your dream.
Ah.
Very cryptic, and I hadn't really got as far as that. But I mean, that's another topic. Life is an illusion.
Right.
Which you may want to go into one day. Well, you probably have already.
Well, we probably do it regularly, yeah.
Yes.
Nobody believes it, though, unfortunately, because people
go
are so much in the illusion that there's no way of seeing that it's an illusion.
Well, you can make a case for this if you want, but I mean, it's another topic. Anyway, so she then took an interest in me because I was only there for a short while, and she said, come. She then had a flat. And I went to visit the flat. The first thing she showed me, she said, before you ask me anything or talk to me, I want to show you something. And it was a script by somebody called Premananda. That was the first thing she showed me. And that was the interview that he had, which was probably the first time that you brought.
It would have been the interview I did with her for the Blueprints for Awakening book.
And it was.
Yeah,
it brought her to the notice of many, many people, this interview that he gave.
Right. We had lots of fun doing it. You can put the camera maybe on this picture of Radha. Which camera? Hmm? She had a lovely smile. This was...
yes, she was a very beautiful young woman. Well, she wasn't young then. She was probably in her 40s, but sometimes she looked as if she was 18 to 20.
Some other pictures of her.
Yeah. Educated woman from a Brahmin family.
She used to work in the tax office.
Yeah, she was a computer expert in a tax office in Hyderabad. And she did meet her husband in Hyderabad, but it was she told me it was a brother and sister relationship. The only reason she got married was through family pressure.
Right.
Because in India, there's a lot of family pressure for people to get married. And this was a way out, because this man that she formed this relationship was also interested in Veda Vedanta. Yeah. So she called him father. And he, a very fine man, still alive, and he lives in the house where she was. Anyway, she gave regular satsangs, and of course I was only in Arunachal for a short while. She would occasionally ring me up, she said I can always correspond with her in email. And then I saw her at least once a year. And I did learn a great deal. I mean, she corrected a lot of misconceptions I had. And she used to take us on... she arranged coach tours of going to spiritual...
Oh, really?
Spiritual places, yes, with the people interested in it. And we went to the temples at Madurai, where Ramana had his enlightenment experience, and then to Kanchi.
Ah, yeah.
And anyway, so I learned a great deal from her, and I did write the foreword to her book eventually.
Right. Yeah.
Then the difficult part is the ending. It's probably not the ending. Some people say it's the beginning. Is her decision to take what is called Jiva Samadhi, which is quite rare, but there are precedents where...
Maybe I should explain that Jiva Samadhi means taking your own life. So Radha was what we would call committed suicide. But
by calling Jiva Samadhi, it's got a spiritual connotation. It means that it only happens with jnanis, and the famous examples are Vivekananda, Yaneshwara, Ramatirtha. They're three famous examples where they decided they've had they want to reach another plane of being, another plane of existence, and they feel they can help people more from that plane of existence than they can on this one. Caused a lot of grief to the devotees.
And Yaneshwara, maybe you haven't all heard of him. He was a very famous spiritual teacher who, at a very young age, when he was a teenager, was already writing amazing spiritual scripts. And I think when he got to about 21, he got his disciples to brick him up inside a samadhi. So he would go into this space and sit in, as if he's meditating, and they would brick him up in there. So he basically is supposed to be still sitting there. I don't know, it's more than 100 years, I think. Yeah. And now this samadhi shrine is at one of those very energetic places in India where you can go and have a connection to this famous teacher.
That is also the point, that you see, traditionally the tomb of Jnani contains power. Everybody else in India is cremated, but the Jnanis are never cremated, they're buried.
Right.
And that's why they say Ramana Maharshi's samadhi still has a certain power from it. Now with Radha Ma, they rescued the body from the fire. She was rushed to... when her swamis came in, she was dancing in this fire, which she'd built herself, in her puja room, of all places. So it was very premeditated, sticks and kerosene.
Uh-huh.
They rescued the body and they rushed her eventually into
Hospital.
Chennai, but they said it was too late. The organs already had been affected. But they took the body back, and there was a funeral in the house which she lived in, which was her kind of ashram. She called it a monastery. And it's there in the coffin, and you can visit it. I found a certain power from it when I went the last 2 times. And a lot of people, all her devotees attended, including the ashram
President?
yes, and Ganeshan.
Right, right.
Because she did work with the ashram in the later years.
Right, right. I was very touched because I had a chance to have a garland, a flower garland, put into her samadhi. So there's a bit of Premananda there inside. Yeah.
Oh, good.
It was
That explains it.
A last gesture of love.
It was true. Well, I mean, you couldn't help loving her.
Mm.
In fact, she gave me this.
Right.
She came to see me off one day after I was leaving. She was wearing this. And she suddenly took it off and she said, "Have this." I said, "I can't have it." "Well, it's yours. You're wearing it. How can I accept it?" She said, "Have it. You must have it." But you couldn't. She's not the sort of person you could refuse or say no to. So I wear it on special occasions. No, she's truly a wonderful woman. She has written a book which is called Advaita Ratnas, which means Advaita jewels or gems.
Right.
And they're transcripts of 3 of her satsangs, which are full of good humour and occasionally some, things which would surprise you. This dream thing comes up in there.
Uh-huh.
That life is a dream, but this is a big topic, which metaphysical.
Well, I think we just have time for this topic. Life is a dream.
It's metaphysical. Well, it isn't metaphysical. Oh. Well,
I mean, I think we all know here that life is a dream in the sense that, it's almost as if we're each having our personal cinema, and in our personal cinema we're running an amazing ongoing soap opera which is called My Life. It's already been running for a long time. And we share this not with anybody else. Perhaps somebody very intimate with us gets to look sometime. But basically we're running our own movie theatre. And of course everybody else is also running their own movie theatre.
That's a very simplified. That's very good.
Sorry, we need to put this.
It's on the screen. Consciousness is a screen on which this film appears.
Right.
Now the mechanics of it, Ramana gives it twice. Once in one of the hymns, I think, and also another place. But the mechanics are this. He said to Paul Brunton in the dialogues they had, Paul Brunton said, "What is karma?" And he said to Brunton, Almighty God, or Ishvara, preordains each person's life for their spiritual development, drawing it from selective vasanas from previous lives. So that this is very benign. It means the life you're given is based on love, and it's specially designed for your spiritual development. So if there's big trouble, which does happen, or some kind of disasters, one shouldn't really resent this, because all kinds of virtues come from suffering. You know, you learn forbearance, patience. It's ennobling. So the whole of the life, the happiness, the joys, the difficulties, all designed for one's spiritual development. And if you are called to come into this teaching, well, that's better than winning the lottery. In fact, coming back to Neo-Advaita,
I'd rather think about that.
I told Tony Parsons he was trying to get people to win the lottery without buying a ticket.
Right, right.
But
I mean, we also love Tony Parsons, but somehow we understand that he's catering for a small audience.
Yes, well anyway, so it's better than winning the lottery, but in this teaching you have to buy a ticket.
Right, right.
Anyway, so this life is already ordained. That's the film. And it's preordained. The free will is part of the preordination. So you have free will, but it's part of the process. You go through the process of choosing and making a decision, but it's already been set up. So, you know, you're going to buy a new dress. You've decided to have a blue one. You go into the shop. They show you a number. And after a lot of free will, you decide to buy one and you walk out with a pink one. Well, it's already been set up. It was inevitable, you see. This is how it works. So, the dream is in the can. The projector is the light of the self. No, sorry. The light of the self is the light in the projector, and then the projector is the whole of the mechanics of perception, and the screen is consciousness awareness. So once you know the mechanics of it, you can say legitimately it has all the characteristics of a dream. And it has been taken seriously by Western philosophers. I mean, like Schopenhauer, Berkeley.
It's been taken as seriously as that this is an explanation of the illusion?
Some of them have. No, not that explanation, but they've given... No, I'll tell you what they say.
They agree that it's an illusion?
I discussed, there's a philosopher, Ramana devotee philosopher, called John Grimes, who's a professional. He worked in the advanced philosophy department in Madras. And I said to him, what's all this business about a dream? And he said, no philosopher, he said, has ever been able to defeat the argument. Now, Wittgenstein said, it's a formidable argument. It's the center of Western metaphysics. There's another famous philosopher called A.C. Bradley, wrote a whole book called Appearance and Reality, which argues, can you trust it? You see, the senses are deceiving us. Quantum physicists say this is actually a mass of whirling electrons. We touch it and it's solid, and it reacts to certain treatment, but all this material is actually in a state of flux. So you can go into it a bit more. There is something to it, and at last Western philosophers are beginning to discuss it. They call it the hard question. And what is the nature of consciousness? And some of them say, well, it's produced in the brain. But other people say, well, where does the brain come from? You know, it's not quite as simple as that. So it's not exactly a dead question, and it's not a question which is as nonsensical as it appears. Now, what Shankara said is, life is both real and unreal at the same time. This is a paradox. Let's say, I use this philosophical term, empirically, by experience it's real. We all take it as real. by experience. But at the same time, in the background, you know it's unreal, but it's only in the background. So it's real and unreal at the same time. On one level, it's real. On another level of perception, it appears to be unreal, metaphysically. And it comes into the ancient scriptures in various Advaitic texts, like the Bodhidipika, where they discussed how Maya produces it. But this is another topic. I mean, Maya has faculties like makes a superimposition and all kinds of things to create an illusion. But I think it's one of the most interesting things in Advaita Vedanta is this question that life is a dream. Now, what Ramana says is, if you regard life as a dream, you don't worry about it so much. If you think it's real, you're identifying, oh, how terrible, this shouldn't happen, oh. But if it's seen as a dream, you don't identify with the drama of the world quite as much as you would normally. But it is the hard question, I think.
What do you mean by hard question? Yes,
well,
it's not easy to see it.
It's not easy to understand it, that it makes absolute sense. There's something in us resisting it.
I mean, one could argue that as soon as you see this, then you're free, actually.
Well, yes, if you really do.
Yeah, then you're free, because you're not in the illusion anymore. You're not identified anymore to the illusion. Yeah? So that could be some definition of self-realization.
Yes. Well, with Ma, that she made this remark, to me, well, I'm only an appearance in your dream, which I didn't really follow, but later I did have an experience, unfortunate experience, of hallucination. And I'll better tell you exactly what happened. I was having I did live in Tirunelveli for a period of time, 6 months, and I was having sleepless nights. So I took Valium, and it gave me very peaceful nights. And you could go to the chemist and you bought it over the counter. Well, the Indian government eventually they stopped people buying it over the counter. You had to have a prescription. So I thought I'd better go to a doctor. And there was a practice which was recommended to me, and it consisted of an allopathic doctor and what's the other one? Homeopathic doctor. So I thought, I'll see the allopathic and he'll give me a prescription. But he wasn't there that day. So I saw the homeopathic and I told her, and she said, stop this Valium immediately. I will give you something else. And she gave me things that looked like mothballs. And she said, don't worry, you take those, you won't have any problem. I did exactly what she said. And that night, I entered a series of most wonderful hallucinations. I assure you, they were more real than this particular hallucination we're in at the moment. I mean, quite incredible. I went back to London for the weekend, came back, saw doctors. My son came over to Chiru, I took him around. I went to a Satsang when there was an argument and blah blah. I was also caught up in some kind of romantic situation as a dance and then told off.
You were dancing in Tiru?
Yeah, well, one of the the hallucination, there was a house I entered and there was a public dance.
Right.
And I thought it was perfectly all right. And the first thing they said when I got there was, you have to put your mobile phone, leave it. You know, and it was a big basket where you put the mobile phone. And then the hostess said, you know, would you like to dance? I said yes. But I got rather struck with her, you see. And I think I was slightly, what's the word?
She was probably the nurse, the doctor, the homeopathic doctor who gave you the pills. See, that was her way of catching you.
Let's say maybe I was a bit too forward. That's the word I'm looking for. And she suddenly turned on me and threw me out. And I was very dismayed. Anyway, eventually I was recovered, because I was sitting on a doorstep when I was having these hallucinations, sent to a doctor, and he gave me an injection, and then Ma took me to her house where I stayed. And then I said, you know, Ma, I've had the most wonderful time. I went to London. And she said, have you got your passport? I said, yes. So she said, show it to me. She said, no, you've gone nowhere. She said, you had a series of hallucinations. Now you understand what Maya is. Ah. So she treated us very, very fortunate. I now understand what Maya is. So then, when I got back to London, because the ashram said you better get home and have proper treatment. You've got malnutrition, dehydration, and you've been hallucinating. So my doctor said the worst thing you can ever do is to tell people to get off Valium immediately. It has to be a very gradual reduction, little by little.
Right.
And he said, that's of course you had them if you suddenly stopped taking them like that. So that was my understanding of life as a dream.
So can somebody buy some Valium?
Actually, they're more real than... They're amazing.
Yeah.
Hallucinations are very real.
Yeah. Good. Well, we've covered a lot of ground tonight.
Yes.
So thank you very much. It's very beautiful.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
And stimulating.
Thank you.